Hey everyone, and welcome to this Unity tutorial on how to use the Unity interface. This is not going to be making anything, making any games, programming any games. Go ahead and look ahead towards the making your first 3D game in Unity tutorial coming up next. This is just how to use Unity, where everything's located, what everything is meant for. So if you're already clear on that, just skip on ahead. But if you're staying this far, then good. Okay, let's get started then. So take a look at your Unity. It should look something similar to this. If it doesn't look exactly like this, that's totally fine. I just want to point out 5 important things that you need to have open for Unity to basically run smoothly for you. So first things first, I have a Scene tab, I have a Game tab, I have a Hierarchy tab, I have an Inspector tab, and then I have a Project tab. If you don't have any of these right now, come up here to Window and then just click on the ones that you don't have. And then again, if it's not laid out perfectly like this, that's totally fine. This is just my preference on where everything is located. So let's get started. To begin, we have our Scene tab. And the Scene tab is where everything in your game is located. It's how you go about building your game. It's how you, the developer, organize the layout, the position of all of your objects, and basically building your level and just stuff like that. So you can see right now I've already got a couple of things in this level. So I've got some barrels, I've got a player, and the player's got a gun. I've got some mountains, some grass, just fun little stuff like that. Now, one thing to point out is the player is white. It doesn't look very good, but that's totally fine because the camera is actually in front of the player. This is a first-person game, so the player is actually never going to see any of this. This is kind of behind the scene that you, the developer, are going to worry about. So let's go ahead and take a look at what we've got so far. We've got some barrels, and I can just click on these barrels, and they'll be selected. Same thing with the player. And then I can use scroll wheel to zoom in and out. I can use center click to kind of drag the scene around. And then I can use right mouse click to look around like that. You can also use these axes up here. So I can click on this x-axis and then I'll just look at it from the side. I can look at it from above, from behind, and just, stuff like that. So let's go ahead and reposition that. Next up, we have our Game tab, and as I mentioned, that our game is in first person, so you can actually see that white capsule behind the camera, and that's totally fine. This is what the player is going to be interacting with, so you need to make sure that as long as this looks okay in here, this is what the player is going to be seeing, so that's totally fine. So, you can see right now that we're looking at some hills, we've got a gun, and that's about it. We can't click, we can't walk around, we can't do anything right now. And that's because our game is actually not being played right now. This is in pause mode basically. So look up to the top of your screen and you should see a play button, a pause button, and then a mix between the two. Now that mix between the two is basically for stepping frame by frame. It's basically just used to debug your game and make sure that everything's running smoothly, so you don't miss it going too fast. So it lets you slow down the game and just make sure that everything's running the way it's supposed to. The pause button is self-explanatory, as is the play button. So let's go ahead and hit that play button. And then you can see that our game will now come to life. So I can now look around, I can walk around, some enemies, there they are. They'll spawn in a second. So this is what we're working with right now. And this is going to be making your first 3D game. So let's go ahead and come out of that and we can revisit that in the future. So moving on, look at our Hierarchy tab. I'm going to switch back to Scene View as well. In our Hierarchy tab, this is a list of all of your objects that are currently located in your scene. So like I was doing before, I can click on these barrels and you can see that that barrel is now selected right there. And I can do the same thing. I can click over here and you can see the barrel is selected in the scene, of course. So this is a good way to see how many objects are in your scene, where everything is located. If I double click on the player right here, it'll zoom me into where that player is. Same thing with the barrels, so I know exactly where everything is. Oops, don't want to rename. And this is where everything is in the scene. So this is a good way to keep track of your objects, make sure nothing gets lost and stuff like that. On the right side, right here, I can click on any object in my hierarchy and this will bring up the inspector of that current object selected. So right now this is the player object, which has the most going on because it's user controllable and other stuff like that. So you can see it has different components. These things are called components, and components are basically just a way to build up your object and make sure that everything it makes the object what it is. So for the player object, we have a thing like transform, we have a capsule collider so it doesn't fall to the ground or walk through walls. We have a character controller which allows it to move. We have a script which also helps it move and do all the logic behind the scenes stuff. And we got an audio source for the gunshot and just stuff like that. One important component that every single object in Unity has, so yeah, I can just click through and they all have one thing, they all have this transform component. And that makes sense because the transform component keeps track of the position, the rotation, and the scale of every single object in your scene. So you can see right now that the position of this object is 300, 7, and 290, stuff like that. Well, I can then make this 303, and it actually moved just a little bit, but you couldn't see that much. So what you can actually do then is you can hover over the X, Y, and Z of each part, and that becomes a slider. So now I can click and then drag it left and right, and now you can see that it's moving along that axis. One thing that people don't really know is you can actually do math inside of this. So I can type in +1, +1, and you can see that it's moving just 1 unit at a time. And I can -1 to get it all back into place. Same thing with rotation. You can just mess with that, and then it'll just, now I'm looking at the sky, now I'm looking at the ground, so stuff like that. And then the scale is how big your object is. And this doesn't have to be uniform, so like I can make this a bit wider than it needs to. It's going to mess up with my collision detecting, but and then you can make it super tall if you really want to, really, really tall, and then just mess around with it with your objects like that. Moving on to the final tab, we have our project tab. The project tab is pretty much where all of your different scripts and sounds and textures are saved for your use again and again. So I downloaded the barrel and gun off of the Unity Asset Store, so they all came in their own folders, but I have a folder for like materials, so for all the grass and for the enemy texture. That's where everything is stored there. I have my scripts in my own folder, and then I have one sound in my sounds folder. And then I have a prefabs folder, and a prefab, what that is it's basically a snapshot of an object. It's a saved object that I can basically just copy and paste whenever I want to. So right now I have a barrel prefab, so I can just click and drag more barrels into my scene, just like that. And so these barrels are all the same. And that's actually why these, in the hierarchy, all the text is blue, because that means this is a prefab. So all of these are under the same, they're the same object in a sense, just copy and pasted multiple times. So I like to organize my project so everything's not in one big folder. So this is just, coming from me. It's good to organize all of your stuff because you don't want to work with one giant folder because you will go crazy. One last tip before we head out, head back to your game tab and you'll notice that there's a maximize on play button right here. I'm going to leave that unchecked because one thing that you can do is you can actually I can go over here and then edit this position of this object to be x equals 0, and then it'll just hover around because it's gravity and stuff. But what I can do is you can see it's a -12 right now. I can actually stop the game now, and it's actually jumped back to 292. So one thing to know is that if you make an edit in play mode, it will be lost and you'll feel very silly once you exit play mode because all of your hard work is gone. So what people like to do is they click this maximize on play button, and then whenever you play, you can clearly know that you're in play mode and you can't even edit anything. So this is just a good tip for you like that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial on just working with Unity. Check out next tutorial on making your first 3D game. So look for that one in the future. This is Ryan. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.